Welcome to Culmination, where we're not experts, but we sure have a lot to say. In the process of becoming our best self, I have with me the theater education major, Casey Johnson, to discuss the persona and acting. And with that said, let's get started. So, Casey, what is acting and when do we do it?
Okay, well, acting from the point of theater is acting. Well, I can't use the word acting. Acting is doing actions and reacting under false or under imaginary circumstances. I guess that's the best way to put it. Really simply, it's stepping into imaginary circumstances and believing. If you're another person or you're in a different time period, it's coming under those things and reacting how you think that you should.
So it's like a role, almost.
Yeah.
Huh. So, what other kinds of acting are there?
Um, I would say there's, obviously there's theater and film acting that's what we really think of when we think about acting. But then, there's also acting, um, gosh, everywhere in life. Like people always put on a performance kind of for other people, not a performance in terms of being up on a stage, but you see performance in how people have interactions with each other. People don't always say the truth. People don't always say what's on their mind. People might try to appeal to the people that they're around.
Yeah. And do we consciously do that, or do you think that just kind of happens?
I think it depends. I think that it happens subconsciously a lot, especially if like you're just kind of a type of person who really puts your worth into what other people think about you. I think that's especially when it can happen like subconsciously because you're so used to it that you don't really think about it. Um, but then I mean, I think there's totally times that it can be um, on purpose, like if you're meeting someone for the first time or you're trying to impress someone, like if you're walking into an audition or if you're meeting um, your girlfriend's parents or anything like that.
Yeah. Um, so that makes me wonder, are we always performing essentially? Because we're always
Um,
placed in these roles, right?
yeah, I don't think so. I think that we do a lot and a lot more than we realize. Um, but
Explain.
I think that when you're feeling, I think that when you're really living, I guess, in a healthy way. I think if you're really focused on yourself, not in a bad way, if you're kind of doing some kind of self-care things, or you are just really trying to do what makes you happy, I think that can kind of pull you out of that performance mindset.
Mm-hmm. But are performances and just acting in general necessarily bad?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's a good thing if you're talking to someone and maybe you don't want to talk to them, but maybe they keep asking all these questions, like and you don't want to be rude to them. You don't want to just like walk away. I don't
Right.
think that it's a bad thing to stick with the small talk, stick out the conversation, or if you're trying to impress someone in like a job interview, like I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing as long as you're not making up a completely different person. So
Right.
yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I do think that if you do it all the time, it can get exhausting and it can take a toll on you.
Right. And I guess we can dive into that in a second here, but I guess to add on to that, it's like it is good to act sometimes, especially at the beginning of a friendship or a new connection in general. And to name a few examples, it's like, okay, to stick it out to somebody or with somebody who you don't really like, but you don't want to seem rude, like you said, or like that job interview where you want to look capable and maybe like your whole being might not necessarily be the most efficient, productive person, but you don't really want to show all that weakness. I mean, you want to
Yeah.
be humble, of course, but like, I don't know, you don't want to look like you're not fit for the job, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and then like meeting your girlfriend's parents, like you said, I don't know, I could see how eventually, as you got to know them more, you could start like cutting the act a bit just because
Hmm.
they know you longer, there's longevity, there's more of a sense of trust.
Yeah,
But at the beginning, it's like you want to sit there with your upright posture in that chair, knowing which
yeah.
fork is the correct fork out of four of them.
Yeah, yeah. And that was just like the first example I thought of. But like like for example, like in my relationship, like I've been dating my girlfriend Kelly for over a year and a half, and like the first time I met her parents, like, it's just the nice things to do. There's not any like malicious intent behind it. You just walk in and you're like, hi, you use like Mr. and Mrs., say please and thank you all the time, like shake your hands and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
now like I know them, so it's just like I've known them for over a year and a few months, so it's just like less formal, and
Yeah.
um, there's more, there's less like fear of messing up and saying something wrong or something like that.
Right. It was like more about the first impression at the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, Although that, I use the word trust, and when planning for like, okay, this is probably what we're going to talk about, this is what the topic of the episode is going to be, I never once thought about trust, but that seems like a crucial point here. What do you think?
I think the more that you trust somebody, I guess the closer bond that you have with them. I honestly think a lot of performance in terms of like relationships and stuff like that, a lot of performance I think comes out of fear, of not doing everything right, not being liked necessarily, um, for who you are. And that's for extreme circumstances. It's not always that way. So I think that the more that you grow close to someone, the more that you trust them, the less kind of fear that you'll have of that.
Yeah. And it also makes me wonder too, like I'm thinking about, and as some background, like you're somebody who did choir and theater, so we'll probably
Hmm.
talk a bit about that. But you know how like in shows, like in actual show, like theater performances, which is of course different than like the everyday interpersonal connections that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It goes along with what we've been talking about with trust. How isn't that weird how even though let's say two actors are performing, they're literally a role different than their true selves. But if they have good chemistry and trust, like personally, like with their true selves, it's almost like their characters also have that trust. But
Yeah.
we just kind of almost ruled out that acting is what you do when you don't have trust. So I don't know. I'll pass the baton to you on that.
Yeah. I think in terms of like roles, like um when you're acting as a character, on a stage, I think that it's kind of weird, but um even when you're performing a role, you get scared that you're going to do something wrong, or you're going
Yeah.
to do something that's out of character, or it's way too much. Like you don't want to, um if your character is supposed to be, I don't know, um if you're supposed to be like super crazy or something like that, you almost don't want to be too crazy because you don't want people to like criticize your acting, like, oh, that was just way too much. But
Yeah.
honestly, I think what you have to do is like trust in that circumstance that like all the people you're acting with, like they're also performers. They'll get it if you mess up. Like you might as well just go for it and put your all into it.
Mhm.
um yeah.
Then they're also like reacting like you said. So let's say if you played the part somewhat incorrectly, they have to almost adapt because if you're supposed
Yeah.
to be this crazy person and you've got like a very high tolerance and like Like you're just a super calm dude because you're not acting that well. Like,
Yeah.
is it really appropriate for somebody you're acting with to say like, "Oh yeah, you're the craziest guy I know"?
Yeah, yeah. You almost think that people are gonna like actually think it about you. Like I was doing this scene this year in my acting class that was from a play called Proof. And in that play there's just like a couple that's arguing. Um and I am, I consider myself a nice person. I think everyone considers himself a nice person.
Uh,
But the like boyfriend character was just so like extremely like ignorant, and he was super kind of oblivious to the world and how the other character was feeling.
uh,
And like I did not like him. Like just reading the play, I did not like him. And it
you
wasn't
can
on
never see him.
purpose. Yeah, yeah, it wasn't on purpose, but when I like performed the scene, I didn't really I tried to steer away from those like characteristics.
Uh,
like like I almost didn't want to take those on, kind of because I didn't want that to be, I guess I didn't want that to be associated with me. I didn't like put my all into that area. So,
yeah. Which is very interesting because when you think about it, it's like these traits that you didn't like. And this is interesting because this is like literal. Like you don't
mhm,
want to actually play a role like this
yeah.
with these negative traits, but almost psychologically, we all have bits of those things that we don't like about ourselves. Like maybe we all
Yeah.
have that ignorance and uh what was the other word you used?
Um I don't know, oblivious. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
remember what it was. Yeah.
Right, like we all have those aspects of ourselves that we don't like. So it's almost interesting how when we're quote unquote off stage, like in the real world, we try to act to cut away these negative traits about ourselves so we look socially desirable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, did you realize that when you were taking upon the role?
Um I started to realize it when my professor called me out on it. He just was like, Casey, you're really not playing up these certain parts. Like, why aren't you doing that? Because he had kind of reminded me a couple of times, and we sat there and just kind of thought about it, and I was like, I'm scared to go for it, and I don't know why. And then
Huh.
we kind of sat there and talked about it for a little bit and realized, and that was like my second time performing the scene, maybe, but we ended up doing it, I think, 4 or 5 times for the class. And so by the end of it, I had been able to grow out of that area and to just realize, like, okay, I'm just gonna go for it because this is like what I'm supposed. This is acting. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's it's interesting.
yeah. It was really weird. It was almost like, I mean, I think that it's that being looked at that way, the way that I looked at the character could have been, this is thinking way too much into it, but that could have been like, a fear of mine to be looked that way. So I was trying to push that away, even though I was acting a role. So it was a really weird, um, just kind of experience.
Yeah, I laugh at the part where you say this might be looking too much into this. Like, do you know what show you're on, buddy?
Yeah, yeah.
It's literally what I do on a daily. Um, do you want to talk about that more? Because I feel like that's kind of the you struck gold there. There's something
Okay.
we can work with here.
Yeah. Just about that specific like story.
Yeah, like you you notice that you don't want to be viewed in that way. So
Hmm.
of course you didn't want to act like this person
Yeah.
that would be perceived in that way.
Yeah. I think that um I think that it's interesting, but I think that actors get really good at this kind of seems like I'm taking a turn, but I think it
Hmm.
connects. So I think actors get really good at like just like surface level conversations with other people, like people that they don't know, because they kind of like anyone can be good at it, but I think like specifically actors can get good at doing that because they're used to just um, entertaining.
And they
Um,
specialize in it, yeah.
yeah, they specialize in it, but really anyone in those like surface level conversations, like, or I guess a better word would be like the conversations you have to like make an impression with someone. Like you don't want to show any of the bad, kind of. You kind of want to only show like, hey, here's all the good things that are happening in my life. Like, a typical conversation you have with anyone when you first see them is like, hey, how are you doing? Good. How are you? And without a thought, you say that you're doing good because you don't want to like dig into the
Right.
actual problems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you don't always want to like I'm not going to talk to some random person that I haven't seen in a couple of years about like my deepest problems right now. But like but
Hey,
like
how you doing, buddy? Oh, I'm just absolutely terrible right now.
yeah. Um yeah, but then I guess that the way that I'm tying this together is to say that like I wanted I don't I want people to have a general impression of me, and it seemed counterintuitive to try to play up parts about myself that I didn't like, or that I was afraid of. Um, yeah,
Oh, so like acting, like literally acting in that role for a class, like it made you feel like that might make people think differently than like the true you?
yeah, and it wasn't like that wasn't my first thought when I did the scene or anything like that. It was only after kind of digging into it and being like, okay, why do I not want to kind of play this up? Um,
Right.
because yeah, I think that it's just kind of like I think, what am I trying to say? My personality, that I think a lot about what people think about me more than I think about myself.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's definitely something I've gotten a lot better at. Like I realized that that was kind of how I was um, acting, I guess.
Yeah.
I realized that kind of like junior, senior year of high school. Um, so it's been just a year or two maybe since realizing that.
Yeah.
But I think that I have gotten a lot better at pushing away the kind of like performance of like what I need to put on and focusing on like, okay, what am I really like? you know?
Right. And do you think that's hard, especially when you're in this whole acting career of theater and everything? Like, it's such a big part of your life, especially in high
Yeah.
school and especially when you're pursuing it too.
Yeah.
Um, did that almost serve as an extra barrier to you when finding your true self, just because there's all these acting roles that you had to fill?
Yeah. I think yes, not necessarily because it's not like anytime I took on another role, it like wrecked the all the progress and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I think that it becomes so easy and habitual to just
Okay.
kind of perform. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because it's like obviously, if you play a role that's similar to you, maybe if it has like a trait that you might like, maybe you'll start pursuing that trait in real life. But what if
Yeah.
you played as, I mean, there's many examples I could do, but what if you played as somebody who's like a Mary Sue or like somebody who's perfect?
hmm
And then like, have you ever had a role like that where you just started thinking when you were done or off stage, like, man, this person's perfect, and, like, here's the list compiled in my brain of every reason why I suck and everything I need to
Oh,
work on.
yeah. Honestly, I haven't really thought about that, but now that you say that, um there was probably like the whole second half, like so like the last 2 years of high school. every show that I was in, I was cast as like the boy next door, like boyfriend, like perfect guy kind of thing. Um, and that's just like how the different shows went. Like there
Yeah.
was like Adam's Family, and in that musical, the daughter has grown up and has a boyfriend, and like I was that, and like I was supposed to be the contrast to like the crazy monster family. Like I was just like a normal guy.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you know Mamma Mia. There's like the
Yeah. Here we go
boyfriend's,
again.
yeah, the boyfriend Sky. So he's just like supposed to be this like uh honestly, I think he's a rock. He doesn't really have much of a personality, but that like that just means that like there's nothing, wrong with him. He's just like, the stereotypical, like in a movie,
Just
he's like the
cast.
stereotypical like hot boyfriend thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I think that there's some times where um I could, really enjoy that, and I could um, really like some of those traits. Like kind of some of the traits I can think of are like adventurous um, and like level headed and like um, I don't know, other people like them and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. I don't know. Of course, my background is I never really acted, you know.
Hmm.
I've performed, whether that was like in a band show or a choir show. Um, but I just when I observed that what you do, that's just always what I wondered.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a huge problem that came into contact with like me trying to figure out who I was and stuff like that. But I think that it can kind of make you kind of yearn for that. It can make you be like, oh man, I wish I was that. Um, you know.
But also, I could wonder if like the opposite effect, where you play somebody, maybe the villain, or
Hmm.
maybe like somebody evil, just somebody with, even if they're just a regular guy with some trait that you absolutely hate from other people when they do that. Uh,
Hmm.
maybe like overly bossy or rude, for an example. Uh,
Yeah.
maybe too much high energy, like it's not even a negative thing. It's just like they're so extroverted that it's like draining as hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's just like when you play as a character like that, it's like, wow, like, am I like that? Because I would
Yeah.
not want to be like that.
Yeah. Totally. And I think that that kind of ties back to just that same kind of scene I was talking about. Um, in my acting class where I didn't really like the guy character. Yeah, I think absolutely. Like it definitely when you're playing these roles, you kind of reflect about your own personality throughout all that.
Right. So how did you, I mean, obviously you're no expert. You're like what, like second year in college, first?
Yeah, I'm about to start my second year.
Yeah, like how did you kind of find yourself through all this?
Yeah, and like you said, obviously I'm no expert, and it's like something I'm working on. But honestly, I kind of realized that like in acting on stage, like that kind of performance is exciting, and it's like it takes a lot of um you wouldn't think it if you didn't know, but it takes a lot of like um intelligence, I think, because it takes a lot of like research and practice and breaking down scenes and like literary analysis and stuff like that. So I think that that kind of acting, it's like super exciting and it's super energizing and fuels me with energy. And
Yeah.
then when you perform around people, um, to an extent, like sometimes it can become exhausting, um, especially like when you've just been like acting like someone you're not for a while. And I was getting exhausted, and I was realizing that. So honestly, I thought I was super extroverted and was like, I don't know, maybe I'm introverted because this is draining me. Like, this is all exhausting me. But
Uh,
I don't know that that's true. I think that it was kind of the unhealthy. performance around people was the exhausting part, and I still love being around people. So it's kind of
Right.
like, okay, so how do I figure out what what makes me happy, what I'm actually like, how do I be fueled and kind of less exhausted? And honestly, just rest was super helpful. Like not in terms of sleep, but like I love being around people, like I said. So it was kind of hard to just make intentional time to rest. I think like spending time like by yourself, not working, just doing kind of whatever you want to do,
Yeah.
um, is really, really, really refreshing. Because um, you just find out like what you're like when you're not trying to impress anyone. Um,
Right.
and then I think I could kind of carry that into um, doing figuring out, okay, when I'm with other people, what makes me feel the same amount of rested. Um, does that make sense?
Like your closer friends that make you feel recharged rather than drained.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah. So at first I was like literally like um this is like a um you know mostly like an older like religious tradition like Sabbathing, but
Yeah.
I was like literally Sabbathing, um and just taking time by myself, just doing whatever, not working, because I even when I'm not at work or like um doing schoolwork or anything like that, I still find excuses to do it.
Uh-huh. That's
So
funny.
I was like, okay, I can't do any of that. Um, and then I think when I kind of got used to, um, okay, what am I like when I'm rested? What do I enjoy doing? What am I actually like? I think then um, I could carry that into being around people and still getting energized from the people I was around. Because, like I
Yeah.
said, I'm extroverted and I like being around people, but I also get drained by that performance aspect. So it's like, okay, how can I be around people? Um, and
It's probably all just regulation if you think about it. Like you can't have too much like you can't be around friends too much when you're extroverted. And you
yeah,
can't be alone too much when you're introverted, you know?
yeah,
Um, I don't know. It's also funny to me that it's like I need to sit down and not work for once.
yeah.
uh, so had something there. Did you have more, by the way? More to go
Um,
on with that?
I not really like that's pretty much it. Besides that, like, um, still like I don't I haven't been good at just taking like a whole day to not work, but I not work or not, do um schoolwork or whatever. I haven't been good at that, but I want to continue doing that because it's just not even not related to this. It's just so helpful, you know?
Do you think so? Because I mean, it also sounds like it might just be your personality. It might just be who you are as someone who enjoys working.
Yeah, I think so, but I think yeah, I do enjoy working. I think mostly because I enjoy problem solving and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But I think that it is really healthy to take that time off
Mhm.
because um I can still do things that I enjoy more, and like things that are hobbies and stuff like that that are also problem solving in a way. So
Right.
like instead of, you know, I work at Kings Island doing tech there. So I, have, but that's kind of more stressful because it's not just for myself, like it's for a company and I'm like working on things while I'm there. But then like at home, I can practice guitar, and if there's something I'm not nailing down, like I can practice it and get better at it. And like
Mhm.
it's refreshing because it's still what I enjoy. It's still kind of that problem solving aspect of it, but it's for me, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like life kind of it carries us in many different ways. Like sometimes you're just kind of following the current and like sometimes you just want water that doesn't push you away. Sometimes you wish you could go back, but the current keeps pushing you. Um and you shouldn't always let the current push you, you know? Like
Hmm.
sometimes it's inevitable. Like sometimes there's events like maybe a breakup or maybe you did something wrong in other ways or maybe you actually gained something. Maybe you actually gained like a relationship and that changes things. Like the current is always flowing,
Yeah.
going to push you one way or another. But sometimes I feel like we have to learn how to stop the current. And almost that idea of stopping is finding control in our lives, you know?
Yeah.
Like not letting it push us and making the right judgment calls for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I guess tying it back to the topic here, it's like a lot of the time we might feel like we're just pushed down this current because we're acting too much. Like when we're going on autopilot through our days, and this is less about like the acting and performance like we talked about like on a stage, but more of just like you start like let's say it's a regular school day and in the morning you act decently friendly towards your parents even though you've got that teenage angst and you want to say something foul.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if that's you. Um, then you go to school and you hang out with the same usual friends. Maybe they're not like the best friends for you, but like, oh, and also this isn't I'm not telling my story for just to let you know. I'm just like painting a picture uh, of just like a random story I thought of. Uh, so it's like these friends that are like they're good. You could do worse, but like I don't know. You're still kind of acting around them, like you're trying to look like you're a stud and trying to compensate for your shortcomings and everything. And then you go to class, and I don't know. Maybe you're like the class clown, so you're acting like that, but maybe you don't truly feel that confidence in yourself. And then you go to a completely different class. Like let's say you're the class clown in biology, and then you go to like statistics, and then you're like just dead quiet, never saying a word,
Hmm.
like, just because, I don't know, maybe the teachers it's a different vibe, like, different
Hmm.
teacher, different students in the classroom. So then, basically summing it up, these are so different things, like, the class clown is different than being the stud amongst your friends, is different than being, like, just the nice guy to your parents when you've got that angst, is different than being that completely dead, quiet person. Like, we all know that, like, super quiet person. Uh, so it's like, how can all of these forms of you like coexist? And that's less of a question that I'm posing and more of like that internal question that we all feel sometimes, you know? Have you ever
Yeah.
felt that way?
Oh yeah. I really like connect with what you said because like I was super hardworking in some classes, and this is specifically about high school, I guess. That like
Yeah.
I was in some classes I could be the super hardworking person that answers every question. Um, Around my friends, like I would be the funny, but also caring like guy, and then I get to like I don't know, algebra two or pre-calc, and I just didn't talk to anyone. Like, didn't really want to talk to anyone. Didn't really answer questions. Just kind of, I did still did my work, but I just didn't really answer anything out loud.
Yeah.
Um, and that's like a really simple example, but there can also be more dramatic examples when you're like acting like a completely different person around your friends and your parents and your other group of friends um, and your siblings and stuff like that. Um, that's that's a really hard question to answer. Like how does that work? um, but it doesn't work well because I think that it's I've kind of used the word exhausting a lot.
Yes.
Maybe that's just been my experience, but I think that that can be super exhausting. It can be unhealthy. Um, and I think really finding out what you're like when you're not performing, and then kind of figuring out like, okay, what are these things that make me perform,
Right.
and overcoming those or removing those or whatever it is, just really helps you be overall happier and just live kind of fuller and like you're more present in the rest of the time.
Yeah, and I'll preface to say that like this is extremely difficult. Like we're not exactly posing the answer. We don't exactly know the answer ourselves. I mean, here kind of tying it back to the I guess the umbrella topic that I think this episode is like the idea of a persona, or the persona is, as Carl Jung, who coined the phrase, he called it the mask of the actor. Um, and a lot of the time we just have different personas towards other people. And we have like a true self. There's also like part of Jung's theory is the shadow, which is like the repressed self, which is all the undesirable traits, where all your sins go. So like sexual desires or malintents, like violent tendencies or fears in general, worries, paranoias, like all of these bad things that you don't want to be associated with. But that's your shadow. That's like your deepest insecurity, your core. And a lot of the time, the persona is almost like a defense mechanism if you think about it. It's like the reason why we have this mask of the actor is to almost curtail all of these traits that we don't want, to almost dissect the things about ourselves that we like and completely ignore and banish the other parts. But the problem with
Hmm.
that is when you do that, you feel empty because these problems still exist. And the worst part is the more you push it back, the more you forget about what your problems actually are. So they're not addressed and you need to address them. And they lurk and they lurk every day. And you'll never really forget that. So I mean I personally I don't fare well with skeletons in the closet. I know there's a lot of people who are able to bottle things up and just like they can function like that. I mean, I'm not saying it's healthy, but I mean like they can actually hold a lot. I
Hmm.
just can't do that. And maybe that's good because it forces me to be honest and take care of things that are bothering me.
Yeah, I definitely think like I'm also kind of the same kind of way. I'm like you, and um yeah, I guess like just the idea of having so many things like built up and so many like problems or what am I trying like um
Bottle it
things,
up. Yeah,
yeah, bottled up, like I that literally like kind of stresses me out
yeah,
thinking
I
about
can't do
that.
that. Yeah, you know.
So like I like if I have some kind of um thing bottled up, whether it's like um, a lie or some kind of wound or some kind of something like that.
Uh-huh.
Um, if that kind of starts to bother me, I instantly kind of want to dig to the root of it and be like, okay, what am I feeling? Why am
Yeah,
I feeling this way? Like,
I'm the same way. Yeah.
what happened? And confront that kind of right away. Um, and like when it to relate it back to the performance idea, like if you're performing you'll kind of shut all of that away and that can get really unhealthy. So you kind of need to sit down and be like, okay, what's kind of being what am I realizing um, about myself? What are
Right.
these things? I need to confront them kind of head on. And if I hate that thing about myself, if I'm able to um, change it, if I'm able to change the circumstances I'm in to not be experiencing that and letting it take a toll on me, then I need to figure out what it is.
Yeah. And a lot of the big thing is just honesty.
Yeah.
Like nobody likes a liar. And acting is I don't want to call it lying because a lot of it isn't exactly a lie.
Hmm.
Some of it is, but I mean a lot of it stems from I guess good intent or just subconscious like I take upon this role, this persona in this specific situation. Every time I talk to my parents, it's like I talk in this manner versus when I'm with my friends. Like it's just it happens. I don't choose it.
Yeah.
It's not like the Persona video game where you can actually choose your different personas. Uh, but like no, you take upon that role. But what I've found useful is just being honest. Like
Hmm.
I have nothing to hide. Like my problems are real problems. Sometimes they're crushing, but like everybody has problems.
Yeah.
Some people have worse problems than me. Although I don't want to exactly focus too much on that because I feel like when you think about it too much like that, then it's like, "Oh, well, my problems aren't that bad because this guy literally has trauma and PTSD." Like you can't
Yeah.
you can never really compare, but all
Yeah.
I'm
No.
saying is comparing in the sense of everybody has problems, so it's not like you're this special guy who has all these insecurities and everybody else around you is perfect.
Hmm.
And that's part of the false illusion of you're not the only actor here. There's tons of people. Like this is a masquerade party. Like you any any situation you enter in life, like everybody's got their fancy masquerade mask and they all look perfect. And I think this is made worse with social media where it's like it's literally a snapshot of everything that they cherry pick that they
Yeah.
want you to see about themselves. Um and this just creates this false fake world that we live in. And that of itself is alarming and can leave you feeling lost. But it all starts with you. And that's where I counter that whole idea of like, well, why bother because the whole world's fake? Well, maybe the world's fake, but you don't need to be. You don't
Yeah.
need to lie to yourself. You don't need to lie to others. Just I was going to say just be you, but I mean that's a cliche for a reason, but how how would you define truly being you without this stupid cliche of like, "Oh, just be yourself, darling."
Mm. Yeah. Um, I would say like being yourself is experiencing like the fullness of your life. I don't know if that's broad and it's um you know, but basically like when you're really being yourself, when you're um accepting your faults and not hiding them, but at the same time working on them, um I think you're when you're not exhausting yourself by trying to perform for other people, life just becomes so much more full. Like it just becomes um, more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that's how I would describe it.
Yeah, I think you did that perfectly, honestly. Like that was a great explanation.
Oh, thank you.
Um yeah, I really resonated with the part of like accepting but in the sense that you're getting better. And I think it's part of the honesty. It's like you're not just being honest about your faults and you never want to embrace it. It's like, "All right, I'm an asshole, so I'm going to have pride in that and be
Yeah,
an asshole." You
yeah,
know? Like don't embrace your weaknesses, but understand that everybody has weaknesses. Yours are unique to you and you accept them. You know that they're problems. You know who you are. And I don't know, you can't run away from it. But what you can do is work on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, like I I feel like people should face themselves. Just and that comes from myself mainly. Like I'm not uh, where I come from is I like to face myself because it's probably the hardest thing you can do. You know, like somebody
Hmm.
goes to therapy because they're an alcoholic. They literally know they're an alcoholic because they need therapy for it, you
Yeah.
know? Like it's pretty obvious to themselves, but there's a distinction between something being obvious and truly accepting that, you know?
Yeah.
And every single time it works like magic. As soon as they accept the problem, it's like, huh, well, you see what happens is as soon as you accept it verbally or like in your head, you throw it out there. Kind of like how you know how words matter in certain circumstances where if you say something foul to somebody, it's like it's out there. You can't take it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why it's scary to necessarily accept your faults because once you say them, they're out there and they're out there. You can't take it back. But
Yeah.
that's also the beauty of it, don't you think? Because now that it's out there, you have to the only way is up.
Yeah.
And you can't play these games anymore. You can't hide this. You can't put on that beautiful masquerade persona and be fake and feel empty at the end of the day or go to all these different classes and be a completely different person.
Yeah.
And disclaimer, like even when you become more honest, it's like there's always going to be some like disconnect between these different groups just because we're social creatures who have different dynamics in different situations.
Hmm.
But there's definitely a distinction when you're more genuine, it's a less wide gap versus when you're just putting on an acting role.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I every time I face myself or like other people admit things, it's like it's refreshing. It's the hardest thing you can do, but once you do it, it's all easier, you know.
Yeah. That's so true. And I think that like the first thing to like doing is admitting something to yourself. Um, and then kind of the response to that and the follow up, I think, is finding someone to continue to talk to and keep you accountable. Like,
Mhm.
um, I've heard, like, I personally don't have a therapist, but I've heard such good things
Yeah.
from friends about like having someone to talk to about all of that, especially like that's someone who's trained in, psychology and knows what to help you with. But even like if it's as simple as like having a friend to talk to that you trust to tell you what you don't want to hear sometimes,
Yeah.
like that's just honestly so helpful, to be able to admit something to someone else so that they can check back in with you and keep you accountable.
Right. No, that's great. But also you also need I just used also in twice in the same sentence, that was weird. Uh, oh, but you also need to keep yourself accountable too, just
Yeah,
for
yeah,
things.
yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, like I said, once it's out there, it's out there. Like you can't
Hmm.
exactly hide, so you're almost going to keep yourself accountable like automatically, you know?
Hmm.
Um, although I can't speak for everybody, but I don't know. You know, it also makes me think about there's like two types of people in terms of like two types of approaches that they use. And one of to problem solving that is. So, one type of person has an approach that's like I am going to solve your problem.
Yeah.
That is me. If you come to me for advice, I will become therapist mode basically.
Hmm.
And some people don't like that. And when some people don't like that and maybe that's good maybe that's exactly what they need. Uh, but some people don't need that, and that's where the other people come in with the approach of more of a passive role. Like they're more listeners, they're
Hmm.
more of like helping you cope rather than solve.
Yeah.
You probably know both types of those people, but
Yeah, I
I
do.
mean, think about it. Like they both have merit, and they both have their own like specialized situations. Like
Yeah.
when it comes to facing yourself, there's a problem that is at hand and a way to go about it to not necessarily solve with a definite answer, but like go about it in terms of the solving process, you know?
Yeah. I
That I would not use a coping thing.
yeah, I think that I'm definitely the solving type where I want to solve everything, and that's something that's been someone has called out about me before.
Oh,
So I kind of like to now, when listening to someone, ask like, do you need me to listen or do you need advice?
right, yeah.
Um, and that's just like that's such a good thing I think for anyone to do, especially the people that always try to fix things.
Mhm. Right. Because it's like the other example is when somebody passes away or something completely out of your control that you can't fix. It's like, what are you gonna fix? Bring them back to life? Like what?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, Casey, but I've been working on my necromancy, but I don't know. But anyway, and I think that's a good point you brought. Like, there's like two types of people, but you could try to work on your recessive approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been talking quite a bit. Do you want to add anything
Um,
about anything?
I guess just overall, we've kind of touched on everything that I kind of have. But overall, I'd just say that like after recognizing what what the areas that you're performing in, the way to kind of step away from that or like heal from that, I guess, um, is like we said, being honest with yourself, being honest with others about what's going on, and it's not just a one and done type of thing. Like
Right.
we have both said we're not experts about this, but it's something that we're kind of walking and figuring out.
Yeah.
Um, and it's probably like you're never going to be perfect. Obviously, like no one is ever going to be perfect. So
Yeah.
it's just like going to take a long time and a lot of effort. And some days will be easier than other days. And this is really can apply to anything, but specifically with this, um, some days like I might be disappointed at myself, like, oh, I feel like I was kind of, performing, or I was like not really being myself.
Yeah.
But that's okay because you recognize it, and recognizing it, you can then figure out like, okay, why was I doing that? And that helps you improve more. So
Yeah. Exactly. Um, yeah, and also, I guess I'll add this. We're so afraid to be honest with ourselves and to be honest, especially when it comes to interpersonal dynamics. Like, it's hard to just be honest with people, but maybe we
mhm.
just need to change our mindset. And here's the mindset I'll pose. You know how I said earlier how, like, kind of the world is fake because we're all at a masquerade party and social
Yeah,
media is a big component?
yeah,
Well, aren't we all like starving for some truth, for some honesty?
yeah, I think so.
So like, why not? Why not be honest? Like that's what that's what everybody wants. That's what you want. I know it's
Hmm.
hard. I mean, I know it's hard, but like, I don't know. Once you start, it's always the first step that's the hardest, I'll admit, but once you start being more honest, it's like eventually the people you're around, they'll start taking off their masks, you know?
Yeah, like you've probably experienced like when you're just like when you meet someone or you become really good friends with someone who's just so like genuine, someone who is just so um you know um open, I guess not necessarily open about everything, but yeah, genuine is the right word. Just
Genuine.
when you meet someone who's genuine, it makes you feel like refreshed in a way, and then also like you can be that with them.
Yeah. Well, that's also like a trust component, but
Yeah,
that's just it. Like, trust yourself that honesty is the best policy.
yeah,
Because lying creates the fog, and the fog makes it hard to see. And I mean, we're already wearing these masquerade masks, so I already have trouble seeing. So we don't need fog too. But
yeah,
I don't know. And we just need find that control and to understand ourselves better because we're all trying to find ourselves. We're all trying to pursue that identity that best suits us and who we are. I don't know. I mean, the persona in acting has its purpose. If anything, it's like the first step. And like we talked about at the very beginning, it's like, doesn't it have merit to act when you first meet somebody? Like if you're 100% genuine, or at least you handle it poorly, where it's like you show yourself off to be really weird, and maybe you are really weird. Uh, like you like to eat rats off the street or something. I don't know, like something weird like that. I mean, don't hide that about yourself. It's a part of yourself, but like maybe not the first conversation, you know?
yeah. I think that you can be genuine, but also like have I don't know boundaries within a conversation.
Yeah. Like once you establish that trust, you can I don't know. But also don't lie in your first impressions. Like that also creates false expectations. Like when you're
Hmm.
eating dinner with your girlfriend's parents, it's like you can't like show yourself off to be like super strong or something because then what if her dad's like, "Oh wow, you're really strong. All right, well help me with all this manual labor. Like help me cut down this tree." And you're like, what?
Yeah,
I've never done that before." Like you can't lie because it'll bite you in the ass later on.
yeah,
Um or like you can't say you're super tidy when you can't even clean your own room or something.
yeah,
But, you could always like with that said, you could always set up a reputation that you want to fill. Like if you set up yourself to be a nice person and maybe you're like the average you're overall like a decent person, but maybe not that nice. Maybe that creates a reputation that you can live up to, you know?
yeah. And you can, you know, always say to yourself and to others like this is something I'm working on. Like you like I could say I'm working on being, a tidier person, something like
Right.
that.
And that would be honest and not exactly like a weakness, you know?
Yeah.
I heard a lot of job what's the interviews, yeah. Like they like to hear specifically what you could work on, like your weaknesses.
Mm,
With that said, it's like you still have to be right for the job, but like you
yeah.
say my weakness is showing up on time or something. Like no.
Yeah. That's like such a hard question. Like in a couple of job interviews that I've done for different things, like they've asked like, what's your weakness? Even in my college audition for theater, I did like a acting and singing audition and then did a little interview and they're like, okay, so like what do you need to work on? Like what aren't you good at? And that's such a hard question because I'm like, I don't know, like I want to get in, so I don't want to say nothing, like I don't want to say, oh, I'm great at everything.
Too perfect. That's my weakness.
Yeah, I'm too perfect. But that's like, it's a really hard thing to do. But like there's no shame in like saying the things that you need to work on.
Right. And with that said, we're coming close to the end here. So before we end things off, right now, do you want to just kind of say your final thoughts or what you think the overall message or takeaway of this episode is?
Yeah, I guess to me the overall message would be um to really realize what the areas are where you are performing, like what your persona is, like what um, kind of the areas that you try to hide, or the areas that maybe aren't your genuine self. Um, and take some time and just think about what makes you feel more fulfilled, what makes you feel um, like yourself. Even if there's things that you need to work on, like think about the things that you want to improve about yourself and be honest about that and be honest with others. And um, just, I guess, like I said earlier, like life just seems more fulfilling and more full when you're able to not perform for every single thing. And maybe whoever is listening, maybe that's not something they necessarily struggle with a lot, but I think that everyone has some aspect of performance in any sort of relationship um, with another person, and just honestly being honest about those things, and speaking up about the things that are in your mind, and really, like, kind of like we said earlier, like the skeletons in your closet thing, like really clearing those up just makes authentic relationship with others and with yourself a lot more enjoyable. So yeah, that's what I would say is the general idea of this episode.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me, Casey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And this has been the persona and acting episode. I think we had a lot of great points, and thanks for listening, everybody. I'll see you guys next time.